Tim, and we're on right now. I'm suffering from cognitive dissonance, by the way. I spent the morning so high and excited about the future of this city, and to see the energy in that room at Henry Ford and the respect that people were showing each other and the pride was just overwhelming. It really was. I almost brought tears to my eyes. And then we went through the neighborhood and we saw homes that looked like the homes that I grew up in. And I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, very same era, the same kind of, with some of the dilapidation and the rest, although this was more. And it almost it did bring tears to my eyes as well. I thought about the love that was going on in those homes and the love that when some windows were painted beautiful green. And somebody put a lot of work into that house that was now being blasted out, and the change that occurred. And when I did the video series, and I want to say Krusty Foundation has been very important and helpful, as is the California Endowment, Kaiser, Robert Johnson, etc. I had the opportunity to visit about 15 cities, and some of them were the height of the healthy ones. You know, we went to Boulder, Colorado, where everybody bikes and everybody's young and kind of rich, and things are pretty good. And we went to Prairie Crossing, when I was walking through the neighborhood, and they had 600 acres, and they could put 600 houses, an acre apiece, spread across the landscape. And instead, they dug out a couple of big lakes. They compressed the homes into much smaller lots, created neighborhoods with front porches, put in 3 organic farms. And some of these organic farms are generating, I was told, something like $15,000 an acre because it's direct-to-consumer marketing of organic food. And this is acreage that was generating $20 to $50 when they were growing corn and soy. So it really is remarkable. I visited Charleston, and the gentleman that you saw very much towards the end, one of my heroes, Joe Riley, who founded the Mayor's Institute for Communities. Joe became mayor about 38 years ago in Charleston. Charleston had the good fortune of not being ruined by urban development because nobody bothered to tear down all the old homes in Charleston back in the 50s and 60s. When Joe got in there, his father had been mayor too, he said, "You're not tearing it down, we're going to rebuild it, it's going to be more beautiful than it ever was." He wouldn't let them put high-rises next to the bay there, the ocean, and put in more parks. Actually, he did something really cool, which is he brought in a couple of culinary institutes, cooking schools, which now people go to Charleston to eat as much as to walk along these beautiful esplanades near the river as well. And I walked around Charleston for a couple hours with the mayor, and I talked to a young couple women there. In the video series, we videotaped them, and they were jogging, and I said, "How do you like living there?" She said, "We love it here." And you heard the mayor say, "We need to build places that are just as good as anywhere somebody would want to visit." And it's not a complicated formula. It's not about the width of lanes and anything else. It's where people really want to be. I visited Atlanta. I had lived in Atlanta. I was actually the head of environmental health in the United States of America for 10 years. I visited Atlanta, and Atlanta was very, very hard for me. We couldn't afford to be downtown, and I didn't want the kids in the public schools. We had 3 sons, and they were just of terrible quality, so we bought in the suburbs that had the best stores. And it turned out to be fine because they got a good dose of diversity and they knew what they were doing, but we had to drive them everywhere. So my wife and I arrived, we both had really hard jobs, and the 3 kids are in 3 different schools between 5 and 8 miles away, and every afternoon at 4 o'clock, we had the opportunity to argue over who was going to pick up the boys that particular day. Talk about bearable stress. And so by the time we got home, it was 7:30, they were hungry, irritable, and needed to do homework, and it was kind of a rat race. So, and visiting Detroit, and I love Detroit. You saw Maliki and the other folks in there. So then I had to go back, and the video series is kind of being done a bit by the producers, streaming 200 hours of video into something in 4 hours. And it's been seen now in 4 million homes in the United States, and it's beginning to get a bit of traction. And I thought, how am I going to write about this, and what is the message, and what's the most important thing about the built environment? And so I'm going to give you, Kimberly Dawn, this gift, my book, to Henry Ford Health System, but I want to tell you what the title of Chapter 1 number one which is, what does love have to do with the built environment? And I have to tell you, I felt so vulnerable and kind of stupid as a physician. How many times in a technical talk at the University of Michigan, either in epidemiology or policy, or in the medical school and pediatrician, how many times would somebody start out with a talk saying, this talk's about love? And really, that's what this is all about, it's about love, it's about community, it's about caring for each other, and what we're doing doesn't matter. We get to the end of our lives, and you haven't accomplished love, you haven't accomplished much in your life. So that's what chapter number one is. I would like to present that to you, and thank you so much for supporting me. I spent about a year here and had a position at the University of Michigan in the Graham Sustainability Institute, but my wife's mother was sick and ill, and it just wasn't going to work for me to be that far from California. So I didn't last. They also recruited me at UCLA in February. But I had spent 35 years there. I had done medical school and everything else. But when I interviewed with the Dean of Medicine, I won't tell you his name, at the University of Michigan, and he's looking at my resume, my CV, and he goes, you're on the board of directors of the American Institute of Architecture, the head of environmental health in the country, you were a health director, and you are into landscape architecture and urban design. This is the most, he literally said this word, this is the most schizophrenic CV I've ever seen in my life. Which is kind of classic medicine, you know, like, you're not standing in your box, man, there's something wrong with you. So, that's not, people there were extremely gracious, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, after all that, I bet all right. So it's a talk I gave to the UCLA nurses. And there was a television series a couple months ago about the importance of nurses. And I love nurses. Not only am I married to one, and my mother-in-law was a nurse, but in truth, nurses understand the environment far better than doctors do. Because doctors think what's going on inside the cells, inside the liver, inside the body is really important. And a nurse always, in their DNA, understands the environment that patient's in, the noise, the intrusions, the interruptions, the wound dressings, etc., really matter. I don't have to give a long lecture to nurses about why the environment, your body, and where you raise your children is really important. So this is the American Nurse documentary, and it's a good show. It sounds unpromising, but it turned out to be great. But the caption, and you can't read it from where you are, is Sister Stephen Glosell with a patient, the American Nurse, a homage to the nursing industry. And I just cringed when I heard nursing industry. Like, you don't become a nurse because you want to go into an industry. It's a vocation. It's a calling from God that tells you to go and take care of people and lead a meaningful life. And so in some ways it's a metaphor for what we've done with medicine in the US, is we endlessly think about it as an industry, and it's about care and loving for each other, as is urban planning, which is an act of love and design as well, as is good architecture, as is good farming and growing food, as is all these things. It's really about the love that's underneath. So I'm a pediatrician, and when you take the child to the pediatrician, they do the height and weight first, and we're seeing about 20 to 30% of the kids we see a day now look like this. I mean, different ages, but 50th percentile for height, 95th percentile for weight. And I actually, by the way, love the fact the musical feature that you had at Henry Ford today was spectacular. The name of the group was?
Wise? Mosaic Theater, the young people, Mosaic Youth Theater.
They were all beautiful. I mean, everybody was fit and in shape, and they looked terrific. And so I think this is the therapy we all need. Another act of love, music. And, but we're seeing a lot of children coming in, and so a good pediatrician doesn't say, start taking medicine, you know, get the soft drinks out of the house. Do your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that Henry Ford told you to do, you know, fruits and vegetables, let's go to bed early, get some exercise. And 2 months after that, the child comes back, and what's changed? in modern America? None. No place to exercise, can't go out on his own, he can't change the food in the cafeteria. And 2 months after that, the child's taking something for his blood pressure, his cholesterol, his depression, at a cost of about $400 a month. I made this up, but I guarantee you this goes on all the time. And what's going on, I'm telling this to the planners and the architects and design people in the room, is we have medicalized what is in fact an environmental set of problems. And thinking medicine's going to fix it. And this medicalization of it, and it means that we've really rigged the environment against the child, and we've rigged it against the nurse and the doctor. So a lot of my physician friends in primary care medicine are retiring at age 60, 62, 63. Not because they're just burned out because they feel totally helpless. They're sitting at the end of the disease pipeline and they're seeing one person after another with preventable diseases that they should have been dealing with the environment that person was coming from rather than pushing pills. And people of goodwill want to do the right thing and they're really kind of discouraged by it. And the environment's rigged against the child, the nurse, the doctor, and the rest of us. Now, at UCLA, we have the school newspaper, the Daily Bruin, and this particular ad, I don't mean to insult General Motors, but General Motors put this ad in the Daily Bruin about 2.5 years ago and said to our kids, they had done focus group testing and found out that most college kids feel like reality sucks. And they're up to their ears in debt, they're worried about getting a job, their parents are difficult to get along with, the usual life stage stuff. But GM has told us that it doesn't have to suck. You can stop pedaling and start driving and get the GM college discount. And you can spend the next 7 years paying off your GMC. And if you do, pretty girls will not smirk at you as you're not polluting, exercising, getting physical activity, and not adding to congestion. Well, I showed this to my students, and they all tweeted GM and said, "You're a bunch of jerks, you shouldn't do this." And one of the young women raises her hand and goes, "Dr. J, you don't know anything." She's not smirking at him. She's flirting with him because she doesn't want to be with the flabby guy driving the car. So, I'm going to tell a bunch of, they sound like jokes, but in fact there's a lot of truth embedded in these things that I'm saying here. GM's right. The most prevalent disorder in America after dental cavities, dental caries, is depression. And we've seen major increases in the rates of depression in the US. And in part, if you're living in a lively community where you feel welcome and healthy and active, you're not depressed. I thought 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care when I was a medical student was a huge amount of money. And now it's almost 19% of all the money in the United States. That's why we are the healthiest people in the world. Because we spend so much. Now, actually, we're number 49 worldwide. We're better than Slovenia, though, in terms of our lifespans predicted in the US. So we're not getting very much by focusing at the end of the disease pipeline. And we've got to begin to move up. And this kind of money going into something that's not generating long-term well-being will eventually destroy the United States. And that's not an exaggeration. The Soviet Union collapsed because they put too much money into something that didn't generate a return. In their case, it was the military. We put too much money into just medical care and not into the things that made Detroit great. Manufacturing, for that matter, food production and other things. It's going to do us in. I apologize, I'm going to skip these slides. So, I was at CDC, I arrived in 1994. I call it that because it was 94 degrees and 94% humidity the day I arrived. This is after I convinced my kids they should leave California because they'll get their own bedroom. That we got there, and Dad, you're the stupidest man. I didn't say this, but they could just, why do we move this? But I love CDC, the variety of issues. We had the childhood lead poisoning program, thanks to Congressman Lou Stokes, $50 million a year. We spent a lot of money on lead poisoning prevention, which the current director of CDC just cut. I was able to get another $40 million out of Congresswoman Pelosi and a number of other congressmen for the childhood asthma program. That's been cut. A lot of the programs that are about long-term things were cut, and a lot of the money is going into short-term, more acute infectious stuff. Because the return, it's not a winnable battle. The return on investment is too long if we worry about chronic disease prevention Whereas if we focus on an Ebola vaccine, you know, in the front page of the New York Times and a Nobel Prize, so it's not getting the investment. But we had a terrific director through the 90s, Dr. David Satcher, who hired me and was still a good friend, followed by Jeff Copeland. Jeff was doing an article on the big killers of the 21st century. And I had to go and talk about the big threats in environmental health. And so I was thinking about atoms. What? I was thinking about molecules, endocrine disrupting chemicals, fire retardants, and the rest. I was thinking about real big things like chemical weapons. We had enough chemical weapons in Anniston, Alabama to kill every mammal on the face of the earth. We, the United States. And we, CDC, had to oversee the destruction of those weapons. I was the interface with Russia for looking at their nuclear issues and basically disarmament issues as well. It was a fascinating job. And I'm driving to the CDC headquarters down Buford Highway, which is 7 lanes wide, and I'm thinking deep thoughts, and I happen to see a lily woman walking along the side of the road. It's all homes of the poor all the way along. 2-3 stories, immigrants, a large-scale effort, a mile and a half between crosswalks. Highest pedestrian death rate in the world. People running back and forth because of 94-degree heat, and it's a mile to the crosswalk. You're going to get across the street, get on the bus because your job's downtown. You'll lose money if you don't get to work on time. And I happened to see an elderly woman walking along the side of the road. She's got a plastic shopping bag, one in each hand. She's bent over with osteoporosis. She looks like my mother. She has red hair. I want to give her a ride. I don't do it. I get to work, and we're talking about all this big stuff, and I'm thinking, poor lady, if she collapses and dies, the cause of death will be heat stroke. And it won't be absence of trees, heat island effects, blacktop roads, poor air quality. And if she's killed by a truck going by, the cause of death will be motor vehicle trauma, and it won't be absence of sidewalks, absence of crosswalks, poor urban planning. And really, public health is about, this is worth writing down, the causes of death. Because that's really what we're talking about, the causes of death. And this is when you're talking about the McGinnis article. That's really where you have to intervene. We can't sit there at the ER door, even though you're an ER doctor, Kimberly Dawn. We've got to get out there in the neighborhood sooner. We thought about the big killers of the 21st century. I won't go through them, but again and again I came back to, we're sitting here waiting for the world to get fixed. Literally, I was in the room with Dr. Satcher and the 7 or 10 directors when they brought the Surgeon General's report on physical activity into all the directors. And it said, we need to get people to do more physical activity, right? We all relate to this, it's good for kids, good for adults. And everybody's, oh, this is great. And finally I said, wait a minute, I don't think CDC ought to issue this. What? We have no right to issue that report. What are you talking about? I said, there isn't a sidewalk within a mile of CDC. No one can walk, no one can jog around here. Why are we telling other people to exercise when we create environments that are as hostile to pedestrians as we possibly can? I was being provocative, but it got their message, and it's happened over time. The automobile was the economic engine. And Detroit is the metaphor for it. It was the economic engine of the 20th century. 25% of all the wealth in the United States during the 20th century came from cars in one form or another. After the war, Eisenhower and Marshall were very worried about all these demobilized vets. And Eisenhower had seen the Autobahns in Germany and saw how well they worked and decided, so we built a superhighway system. And if you look back on it, it was the National Defense Act that built the superhighway system. So putting money in, you have a vision, we're going to get everybody across the country by car. It happened. Largest public works project in the history of the world is the U.S. highway system. By the way, anybody want to guess what the largest public works project in the history of the world is right now? The Chinese high-speed rail system. No joke. So, one way to keep the vets busy was to either send them to college, GI Bill, or to give them a big fat mortgage and make them go to work a lot and give them homes. And that was the instigation for building 3 million homes a year in America. To make room for them, we took down 60,000 square miles of trees. And trees are our friend. I have this on an exam for my students. Why are they good for us? We built superhighways. I joke that this is the California state flower. And they work really well for about the first 5 years they're in place. And after that, they don't work so well because everybody discovers they can get out to the suburban place where they live very easily by doing this. We built places, this one. So here's 2 houses in Florida, and you've just moved in there, and you meet the folks across the fence, and you say, hey, let's get together for Martin Luther King holiday, and we'll have a cookout. So, oh yeah, come on over, bring the kids. So you don't want to pass the baby over the fence, and you have to bring big bowls of food. So I'll just drive over. Well, you have to go to Google, and it turns out, oops, you can drive 7 miles for 17 minutes to get across the fence. This is a joke. Remember I said that some of these jokes this is a metaphor for what we've done in America. And at the end of it, we have built for cars. We have not built for people. And it ends up, then we wonder why people don't walk enough. This is where I work now. And no meeting in Los Angeles starts without the following statement. I'm sorry I was late. There was a wreck on such and such, because driving's not good for you. Every time we're talking about the Superfund site and the cleanup. You're supposed to clean up to a 1 in a million cancer risk for a lifetime exposure. That's what the mandate is. That's how the numbers are calculated. What's your 1 in a million risk for dying in a car? 87 miles. So every time you drive 87 miles, you've got a 1 in a million risk. So going to work in the state capitol, you're buying 2 lottery tickets for death every single day, and yet we're worried about lifetime. So I'm not suggesting we should build on brownfields without cleaning up, but I am saying the relative risk of driving is substantial. People who drive a lot weigh about 6 to 8 pounds more than people that don't. If you drive, your cholesterol goes up, your blood sugar goes up, your adrenaline goes up, your risk cortisol levels go up, and your risk of having a heart attack goes up, and it lasts for about an hour, hour and a half afterwards. Driving's generally not good for you. It's better than walking on the freeway, but leading cause of death for children is age 3 to 34 is car crashes. So I'm the lead for the UCLA campus on the built environment, and we're campaigning to put 20 is plenty on campus. I got a lot of pushback, but at 20 miles an hour, if you're hit, you have about a 5% chance of dying, and at 40 miles an hour, you have an 85% chance of dying. We're slowly convincing the provost and the chancellor to put a 20 mile an hour, but we got it down to 25. And frankly, you asked for 20 because you like it 25. If I had asked for 25, I would have gotten 35. So, whatever, skip this. So, guess what's happened to the young people in America? They have seen the rat race that their parents are in. They don't want to do it. My kids saw the rat race my wife and I were in, driving here and there. They don't. They want to live downtown and take a much smaller house and just put up with it. So this is the rate of driver's licenses, various age groups back in 1983. What do you think is the latest rates for they were able to come up with? So here's 20 to 24-year-olds went from 92 having driver's licenses to 81%. We're seeing this, people are voting with their driver's license, with their feet, with their money, and where they want to live. So I'm going to skip urban heat islands because I don't want to have too much time. But it does have an impact on quality of life. If you've driven for an hour or an hour and a half to get home, you're more likely to eat fast food, you're more likely to not prepare a good meal. I actually liked driving my sons back and forth because the only time Dad really felt comfortable talking about sex and drugs and the dominant social paradigm was staring through the windshield. They liked that better too. They didn't have to look at Dad when they were listening to me. So it was not without benefits driving the kids back and forth, but we spent a lot of time chauffeuring our kids and our elderly around in America. I know this isn't Detroit, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. It's crazy when you have land that can grow huge amounts of food nearby, high quality land, to be bringing it in from thousands of miles away. So California, we've lost all of our best quality land. Orange County, you didn't need to fertilize, you didn't need to water once the tree was established. It was all orange County because it was orange trees. Once they were planted, now it's completely under houses all along, and this has been duplicated all across the country where the best farmland has been turned into residences. And so, what a gift, you've got all this open land, and think about the toxic stuff, but start planting. We became fatter and fatter. And here's obesity in 1981, here's 1997, and here's 2010. So you've added 25 pounds or so to every single adult American, self-reported, about 14 pounds to every 14-year-old. I won't dwell on obesity too much, but if you remove physical activity from people's lives and you provide them large amounts of very cheap food loaded with fat, sugar, and salt, people are going to gain weight. Oh, I'm an environmental health guy. So one day I calculated how much jet fuel we burned because everybody gained 10 pounds between 1990 and the year 2000. And came out to some billion pounds of body fat. And that turned into $1.4 billion worth of jet fuel just to haul our additional adiposity around the landscape in the US in 1 year. It's the only study, this got so stupid. More attention than anything else I've ever done was this little letter to the editor that I did. And Jay Leno cited it. Jay Leno said, CDC says we're burning more jet fuel because we're all getting fat. Now I know why they won't feed us on airplanes anymore. So I briefed Governor Schwarzenegger, I was state health officer, and I went in and I said, what are your priorities? And I said, preparedness, infrastructure, public health, and obesity. This is about 10 years ago. And obesity, he didn't say this. He said, I was a puny kid in Bavaria, and I became Mr. Universe. But the larger message is that we Americans always think it's the individual's fault when something is wrong. And his first response is, well, if you just had more self-discipline, this wouldn't happen. I said, no, our environment is making people overweight. And we drive people towards obesity. By the way, it's a contagious disease. So if you're surrounded by people that aren't eating well and aren't exercising, you are more likely to adopt those behaviors. And I like eating stuff like that. Man, it's got everything I like. It's got sugar, fat, and salt. I'm just a normal mammal, We love that stuff. But if you're poor, you got a lot more of these fast food places in your neighborhood than if you're wealthy. Wealthy people don't want drive-through McDonald's in their neighborhood, I guarantee you. I didn't show this one. Paying 67 cents more to supersize a meal, and it gives you 73% more calories. So that's a bargain. This is a metaphor for America. Because every time you get that bargain, you add an ounce of fat to your body, and that ounce of fat translates to $6 of medical care for a man and about $3.50 for a woman. Start with a joke. The larger message is we're too quick about trading off long-term benefits and risks in order to get short-term benefits. You drive through a poor neighborhood, people are likely to see these ads in the billboards. Boy, you got a lot of billboards in Michigan, by the way. That all you do is gamble and sue people. It's pretty strange. And here are the billboards in the poor neighborhood. You ready? Eat stuff that's bad for you. Drink stuff that's bad for you. Drink more stuff that's even worse for you. And then if you do everything we tell you to do, get lap band surgery and have... But it's thinking the medical system is going to fix your problems. As my obesity rate goes up, my risk of getting diabetes goes up, and this is the green line is for women's risks, the red line, and the dark line is for men. It goes up a lot when you gain weight. So diabetes maps, here's 1994, Michigan at about 5%, and 2007. So we've doubled diabetes in 15 years. We're spending 2% of the entire GDP in the United States on diabetes at this point. Unbelievable. When I was a young pediatric resident, I went to the diabetes clinic for children. I never saw a child with type 2, called adult onset diabetes. Half the kids in the clinic now have type 2 diabetes. Am I going over? Okay, I'll stop in 9 minutes. Sorry. So here's a comparison of people's health. Your age, people, mainly the people in this room, now versus people the same age 20 years ago. Good full-blown physical exam, half a day's testing, and all the rest of it. 20 years ago, just a couple of years past, excellent health. Look at the decline in one generation, your age. Limitations of life function, 50% relative increase. Do you need a wheelchair or a cane? Do you think it's gone up or down? That's a big increase. 7%, these are people late 50s needing a wheelchair and a cane. You see it when you go to Walmart. Smoking and obesity went up and smoking went down, but this is the one that's kind of shocking. It's in my slides. So, if you don't remember anything else from what I've had to say, when we take the ability of people to have physical activity, to walk, to exercise out of their lives, we are depriving them not just of liberty, freedom, but of life. And we're probably depriving them of happiness too, because one of the treatments for depression is physical activity and being out with other people and walking. So it's about as un-American as can be to deprive people of the ability. And you as designers and architects and planners need to design places that are irresistible for people to walk. Because if you give them that, and I'm sure this is true with your river walk, on a nice day, you don't need to tell people to go for a walk. And you don't need to tell kids to run around, they're going to go do it. I'll skip these, sorry, I'm running out of time. So, if you want to get people to walk, dogs work really well. So dog walkers, people that own dogs walk, I don't remember the exact numbers, but 20 to 25% more distance and more time than people that don't own dogs. Just please take a Cooper Scooper with you, but otherwise it's really a good thing. Skip this one. Sorry. Actually, what this is a campaign, because we have two hospitals in Ronald Reagan Hospital where I am and in Santa Monica Hospital. And I'm trying to convince the hospital system to pay for a bike route, or at least the original plans and design and artwork for a bike route, and get the city to pay for it. Because the residents, they literally said to me, it takes me an hour to go the 3 to 5 miles to go from one place to another. If I was on a bike, I could bike over the most beautiful climate in the world, in the US anyway, and I wouldn't have to go to the gym after I did it, and it would be much better for me, and probably safer too. This is the video series I did. I'm going to skip climate change. I'm sorry, I just have to. Actually, these are the countries that produce CO2. They make fat if they produce a lot of CO2. These are the countries that are going to have the most deaths from climate change. And there are serious calculations that deaths by the end of the century will be in the range of 500 million lives related to climate change. What? That's outrageous. Think about the snow mass in the Himalayas disappearing, the Ganges drying up in a large portion of the year, the Brahmaputra drying up, sea level rising in Bangladesh, 180 million people that basically depend on that water to grow rice, and all their wells being destroyed by saltwater intrusion. These are not exaggerations. Americans say, we don't like people from other countries coming here. Wait till 180 million Bangladeshis need a place to live. You're actually looking for refugees from Southern California because we have no water at this point. And so this is not, people joke about it, but it's going to happen. I apologize. Here's some final solutions. You've done a great job because you're not going to get people to eat healthy unless you give them food that tastes good. So the CIA is working hard to change the diet of America. This is the Culinary Institute of America. And they train 10,000 chefs a year. And food has gotten, think about how hard it was to get decent tasting food 20, 30 years ago. And you pretty get, this is wonderful, simple food, but it's good food. This is me when I was a Secret Service man guarding Governor Schwarzenegger. But it really is an event where we were arguing that we ought to be getting price supports for fruits and vegetables. If we're getting price supports for corn and soy and 4 other commodity products that we don't need to eat so much of, why not get price supports? The price of stuff that's good for us since 1980 is twice as high as it was in 1980. The price of stuff that's bad for us is half as expensive as it was in 1980, partly because processed food, sugars and all the rest become so cheap. If you eat food spelled backwards, you're a doofus, and we need to do this, and I don't know if it's a negative advertising, but I always kind of gasp when I see it. It's from a bus station in London. God never intended you to eat a lot of fructose. She put berries at the top of the cherries at the top of the tray, so you'd have to do a lot of physical exercise because it tastes really good. But your liver is not designed to metabolize large amounts of fructose. You eat too much, it turns your liver to fat. You eat more, it turns into fiber. You eat more after that, it turns into cirrhosis of the liver. We're seeing kids with cirrhosis now from eating too much fructose in the diet. Thank you for all the work you're doing on healthy schoolyards. It really is so important. And people will eat healthy as adults if they learn how to eat those foods as kids. Malika, his wonderful work here in the town, and I'll talk about Beltline in the Q&A, but I'm going to just skip to the end, the best exercise. Here, Kaiser Permanente did this health campaign to take the stairs. It's a flight of stairs a day for a year as a pound of body fat. They just didn't talk to their safety people. This is worth looking. If you haven't looked at the active design guidelines, because New York has made major transformations in the design of all their public buildings to be healthy. We've put this on all the elevators in the garages, telling people to take the stairs, and actually to put windows in the stairways, because women especially don't like to take stairways if they feel isolated and there aren't good sight lines. Skip these. This is Ellen. Our state and the federal government require a 1% set aside for art if you were building a building, using either federal dollars or state dollars. We ought to be thinking about doing a 1% set aside for festivals. What is he talking about? Because if you want people to use physical environments, and thought about doing bike routes to the Ozarks where it wasn't the culture to walk. It was a large African American population that was struggling with obesity. The ministers and priests had to set up an event where people would go and do the walking. And once the festivals were put into place, it happened. This is a closing down. First time they closed Wilshire Boulevard in LA for a 14-mile bike ride. The police complained, the transportation department complained, the retail people complained, everybody complained. The biggest proponents now for these closures of major boulevards, 17 miles of Tennis Boulevard, is now the police department, the retail, and the transportation department. And everybody smiles. But really what this is about, and this is maybe where I ought to stop, I'm thinking about Martin Luther King too. Culture is really hard to change. Culture is so pervasive in our lives, we're like fish that don't know that water exists. And because you just think, well, everybody eats this way, everybody buries their dead this way, everybody lives like this. And what we're really talking about is a culture change. And many Americans can't envision anything other than a car-dependent life. And then they go to France, they go to Paris, and they come back and say, you know, my food was great. I ate wonderful food, morning, noon, and night, every day for 7 days, and I didn't gain a pound. And in fact, I lost weight. And so it's a different vision. And so how with this culture change can we create a vision for people to be healthy, to be smiling, to be with the ones we love? And I apologize for going so long, but this is a good place to stop it. Thank you very, very much.